I'm really excited to be here tonight hosting an event with Veterans for Peace. This is an awesome organization which always brings the best minds and voices through our doors. So I just want to give an extra thanks to Veterans for Peace for co-hosting this event. I wouldn't be able to say that David Swanson is here. And as far as his resume, I'm just going to dive in, because where to start. His work in activism, let's see, I'm going to back that up. He's, of course, the author of Daybreak, Undoing the Imperial Presidency and Forming a More Perfect Union, which I will not hesitate to remind you we have for sale up at the desk. But if the book is your first encounter with him, if it's your first impression, I've got to let you know it's the tip of the iceberg. His work in activism has found and utilized a wealth of resources online. He's the co-founder of the coalition at AfterDowningstreet.org. He updates his blog at davidswanson.org regularly, and he's also the Washington director of Democrats.com, even though he doesn't live there. Thanks to the internet and letting us do things from anywhere we choose. On top of those, he's a board member of Progressive Democrats of America, the Backbone Campaign, and Voters for Peace. He's also the chair of the United for Peace and Justice Working Group on Accountability and Prosecution, which obviously meshes very well with his role as a leading voice in the call for impeachment of Bush and Cheney during the Bush administration, and the ongoing call for prosecution of Bush and Cheney for war crimes. As I'm sure many of you might already know, Cheney just spoke the other week pretty candidly about his support for enhanced interrogation techniques, including waterboarding, but the reaction from the mass media has been pretty paltry so far, so I'm sure we might be able to hear some opinions on that. In Daybreak, Swanson reminds us that ending the imperial presidency that we've seen growing in the last several years will take more than just voting in better presidents. It will take a call for action and voicing from civilians of all sorts. But without further ramblings from me, I want to get that conversation started. So please welcome the author, blogger, and activist David Swanson.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you to Left Bank Books. Thank you to Ivan for getting me here, and to Chuck Smith for setting this up even though he couldn't make it. And it's great to have a number of past, present, and future directors of Veterans for Peace here in the room, running the cameras, and I agree that Veterans for Peace is an incredible organization, maybe the best that I've worked with in terms of not being a servant to a particular political party in Washington, having the same views and approaches to crimes and abuses regardless of what label is on them, being willing to go to pressure and nonviolent resistance and direct action, and not placing a higher value on politeness than on saving lives, and being targeted and strategic and effective in their work. So you know, if you're not familiar or you're wondering, you know, what I recommend in terms of how to be an activist group, I would say look at Veterans for Peace.
Wow.
I'm a member. I'm not a veteran, but somebody bought me a membership, which I was delighted to have, and I plan to keep. And I also wanted to mention a candidate who should be here by the name of Byron Delir. Byron, raise your hand.
Hello.
Who is running for state rep, and I don't think Vets for Peace or Left Bank Books or anything else can endorse candidates, but I sure as hell can, and I recommend talking to Mr. Delir and looking into his campaign. You know, the polls right now of this country show 90% of Americans think the government is broken in Washington. 90%. Right? You don't get under 20% on belief in UFOs or any, you know, to get to 90% is just universal consensus in polling. You have over 80% saying that the Supreme Court's decision on corporate spending on elections was wrong. 80% of Republicans, 80% of Democrats, right, saying the same thing. that it's wrong. So public opinion is not as badly broken as we often think it is. And neither is public activism. And I've seen more activism since this Supreme Court decision, more energy, more strategizing and work than probably in the previous 2 years put together. There are good groups I recommend looking into at freespeechforpeople.org. That is in contrast to free speech for corporations to bribe with money and call it speech. Freespeechforpeople.org and movetoamend.org is another one. And at this point we are talking about ultimately amending the Constitution as one of the necessary steps here. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And Democrats.com, which Daniel mentioned I work for, is another good place to go. But activism is, there's a lot more of it than you read about. There's a lot more of it than you hear about on television. It's a lot more effective than we know, and we get the news stories that leave out the activism that preceded a decision. But it is pretty well broken, We pretty well are not doing what needs to be done and are letting things go to hell despite our opposition when pollsters ask us whether we approve or not. And the 90% opinion that the government's broken is absolutely right. It is completely broken. We do not have government of the people. We can't unelect people. It is almost impossible to unelect people at the federal level, right? It's better at the state, it's better at the city. I know in this city, the state is trying to run the city, so it's complicated, but you still are better off the more local you get. But we can't unelect people. And we can barely influence people. And it's the money, overwhelmingly it's the money, it's the media. It may be even more so, the media, the corporate media, without which we wouldn't have these wars, we wouldn't have these abuses, we would have control of our government. And it's the parties, and a lot of the money goes through the parties. And there are 2 voices in Washington now instead of 535 in Congress. It is almost impossible for your representative to represent you if the leadership of his or her party disagrees with you. They control the money, they control the advertising, they control the chairmanships and the seniority and the earmarks and the weapons factories and the votes on bills. They control people. The election machines in this country are not verifiable. The debates are not open to candidates. The ballots are hard to get your name on if you're not in one of the 2 parties. There's a lot of stuff that's broken. And my book looks at a lot of things that are broken. So there are a few approaches we could take to fix things. Right? One obvious approach that we see on television every day, if you watch television, I don't, is to take all of this righteous anger across the political spectrum and direct it into racism and hating gay people and immigrants and hatred of all sorts and going after our elected officials and saying, you can't have health care until we do, and putting in term limits to punish them, even though they'll just be replaced by someone else who will do the exact same thing, and shrinking the government, except for the military, let that keep growing, and directing all of this rage away from corporations.